I want to really quickly cover chronic tendon pain in athletes or people that are actively working out. Okay, they're regularly training and they've had tendon pain for 3 or more months. That time frame is somewhat arbitrary, but we won't argue about that. Let's just say you have chronic muscle or tendon pain, otherwise known as tendinopathy or tendinosis. I'm going to cover a really important concept that's just a little on the nerdy side, but if you hang in there with me for like, I don't know, 40 to 60 seconds or however long it takes me to explain this, I promise you're going to get some value from this. And I want you to spread the word about this because this is a big deal. A lot of athletes are doing things incorrectly when they manage their chronic tendon pain, even inside rehab. So hang in there with me. Tiny bit of nerdiness. There's going to be a lot of value from this one, guys, so listen up. For all the athletes that are currently training, okay, and they're trying to do rehab on top of their training and they're using eccentrics, okay, for chronic tendon pain, this is really what I'm going to try to bring the most value with this post, because there's some good evidence to this point that's saying we should perhaps reconsider using eccentrics, given that almost 50% of people don't seem to respond to it. And athletes that try to do eccentrics when they're in season or doing active play or doing a lot of high-level training aren't responding well to eccentrics, or they're just not even doing it because it's causing pain. There's an idea that with chronic tendon pain, you can have some pain with rehab, and that's very reasonable. However, if you're in the middle of playing, in your middle of season, and we're asking you to do something that hurts, and it's kind of messing with you during your game, it's pretty understandable why you wouldn't want to do it. And there's a little trick that we can use to try to minimize that pain, and we might see a better response. Recent evidence has shown that isometrics, that's a non-moving contraction, can very quickly decrease chronic muscle tendon pain for up to 45 minutes. It can do it right away. Eccentrics can't do that. And another thing isometrics do that is really important, and this is getting on the nerdy side of things, but hang in there for me, okay, is it reduces what's called cortical inhibition. Guys, cortical inhibition, a really easy way to understand it is your nervous system will actually suppress how much of a signal that muscle gets. I'll use the term muscle activation in this post to say that you'll reduce the activation of that muscle because your nervous system has learned that hurts, so I'm going to kind of change things around so that I don't have to cause as much pain. The problem is that if that cortical inhibition remains, there's some evidence to suggest that's maybe why chronic tendon pain lasts so long in rehab and is so hard to treat. They've even shown with a recent study that athletes that used isometrics had a more favorable response while they were in season. First of all, they wanted to do the exercises because it didn't hurt. And second of all, they saw immediate pain reduction, and they saw that pain reduction last during the early phase of their training. It lasted several weeks after they started that training. That's a big deal. Sometimes you have to do rehab while you're in the middle of training or while you're in the middle of, or some people just aren't going to stop training. Let's be honest, like that happens all the time. But to give you something like an eccentric that really hurts and telling you just look, up to 5 out of 10 pain's okay, don't worry about it. If it's messing with your training, oftentimes you don't do it. And again, quite a few people don't respond to eccentrics. So isometrics, I think, should be considered when managing chronic muscle tendon pain because it reduces the pain up to 45 minutes and it reduces that cortical inhibition, which is a big deal. So this is a follow-up to the post I did on training athletes with tendon pain. I got some really good questions and comments, and so I want to try to further that discussion a little bit and tell you guys what I do with heavy, slow resistance training that may be just a little bit different, because I think a lot of the questions that come up is what's heavy, what's slow, and then how do you progress that? Because we talked about starting with isometrics, going to heavy, slow resistance. We talked a little bit about eccentrics, but we can't end our training with slow velocity, right? That doesn't make sense. If we look at rehabilitation for tendon pain as a means to increase the load tolerance of the tendon, we can't just have people moving really slowly, right? That may be where we start, but we have to finish with some high velocity, high impact. So I'll talk to you guys a little bit about how I do this. And some of the stuff I made up a little bit, but it's based on evidence, and I'll talk to you about that, and we'll see what you guys think. And I'd love to hear your comments and questions. Really good conversations from the last one I did, so thank you. One of the comments I get when I bring up heavy, slow resistance is that PTs seem to not understand what heavy and not understand what slow is with regards to that evidence. And so I would point you guys to the literature to find this out, because this has been previously described by Kongsgaard et al. In 2009. And they did a decline squat protocol, and heavy was defined as anything from a 15 repetition maximum down to a 6 repetition maximum. And let's not get into a debate about using repetition maximums to actually develop a true rep max. That's debatable, but maybe a separate debate. But that's how they defined it. They started off with 15 rep max, working down to a 6 rep max. And they defined slow as a 3-second concentric and a 3-second eccentric contractions. So 6 seconds for the total concentric and eccentric. So 15 rep max down to 6 rep max, and then 3-second concentric, 3-second eccentric contractions. That's heavy, slow. Now this is where the discussion gets fun, in my opinion, or really nerdy. So if you're not into this, I don't know why you're listening to this in the first place, but I think there's a velocity-dependent component to this tendon training. And my argument is, and I may not be the first person to be making this up, I don't mean to make that claim certainly, but this is just where my thoughts are. If we use an isometric or holding contraction, and we see that we're able to improve motor unit recruitment, right? We saw a decrease in cortical inhibition when we used an isometric contraction. We talked about that in my last post. And then we go to heavy, slow resistance, and then finally back to high velocity. It seems like there's a velocity-dependent component to motor skill training, motor learning, increasing motor unit recruitment, which I think is really a cool topic to discuss. So I'll tell you what I do when I progress this, and then I'd love to get all your thoughts from you guys, because this is really fun to talk about, in my opinion. If I'm dealing with something that's highly irritable, I told you I start with isometrics. That's usually where I go. Now, what I can do sometimes to bridge the gap between isometrics and heavy slow resistance is there was a study that showed, and I believe it was with lateral epicondylitis, but I can't recall the author of the date, guys, I'm sorry. But they compared isometrics added to concentric and eccentric contractions to just the concentric and eccentric contractions alone. They found better pain reduction with adding the isometric to that movement. So what I will sometimes do is I will do anywhere from 4 to 5 seconds concentric, 4 to 5 seconds eccentric, but I'll add a 4 to 5 second isometric hold. That way I'm sort of bridging that velocity gap and maintaining a little bit of an isometric contraction as we go through the phases of rehab. Now I'll tell you what I do next. So when I use heavy slow resistance, I prefer to use a metronome. Now there's a couple reasons for this. If I'm going to progress velocity, if we can all make the agreement that perhaps there is a velocity dependent component to tendon training, meaning speed matters, then I'd like to progress that. And I don't want to say go faster or go slower. So I like using a metronome to time these contractions. So if I'm starting off and I'm following the evidence on the heavy slow protocol and I'm saying 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up, I'd like to time it with a metronome, okay? And so what I can do from there is I can use that objective tool, that objective measure to progress velocity. We can go from 3 to 2 seconds to 1 second. And that way we're actually seeing a progression occur during rehab, and it's not just a guessing game as to what the velocity is. So a metronome is a good tool. And now I'm going to back up my use for the metronome with a little bit of evidence. The first time I saw the use of a metronome pop up in strength training, and this is probably not the first study, but this is just what I found, it was a study by Lung et al., and I think it was 2015, and I will put that in the notes here for you guys to check out, all the really true nerds that want to read about this. And the reason this is a cool study is because they compared people who did self-paced exercise to metronome-paced exercise, and they found that people that used metronome-based exercise had similar results as they did when they did like skill training, meaning like trying to really develop a motor program. They saw decreased cortical inhibition, which we talked about in my previous post, and they saw an increase in cortical motor excitability with metronome-based but not self-paced training. So it's really cool. So if our goal is perhaps to decrease this cortical inhibition, to improve cortical motor excitability, then maybe we use a metronome. So there's a little bit of evidence for you guys. This post is going to get a little bit nerdy because this is just one of those topics that if we have higher and higher level discussions, we start getting into the science a little bit. And for those who are interested in this, hang in. And if you're not, you're probably not going to like this post very much. So don't listen to it. But I'll try to wrap it up at the very end so that everybody feels like they get value from this. Because I'm talking to personal trainers, I'm talking to clinicians, and I want both of you guys to get something out of this. Okay, so let's wrap it up. What are we talking about when we talk about cortical inhibition, corticomotor excitability? Why does this stuff matter? It's if we can say that pain affects motor programs, all right? If you don't know what motor programs are, go back to my motor programs post. If pain can affect the way you move, and we don't see it very well in rehab or in strength training, we need to use tools that can help you learn that proper program again, okay? And so what do we have? We have isometrics, we have heavy slow resistance, we have the addition of a metronome that can help you pace this so that you're actually building motor control again rather than just creating the movement. It looks right at the surface, but underneath you're following a weird motor pattern. So this stuff matters, guys. This is high-level stuff for the strength coaches and for rehab professionals. Give this a shot. Let me know what you think. And again, I'd love to hear any comments or questions. This was a fun discussion I had last time I did this, so let's get into it.